There's a couple of competitors now in the integrated development environment, or IDE space. There's the old but gold Visual Studio Code, which if you're watching this video, you have probably used before at some point. JetBrains changed WebStorm's licensing so it could be used for free for non-commercial use. That was last October. There's Zed, a new editor made by the creators of Atom, and it's insanely fast. I gave it a quick test and the website does not lie. It is insanely fast. It is the fastest IDE I've ever tried. And then there's Vim. Kind of weird me putting Vim on the same level as these guys because Vim isn't an IDE. Vim is a terminal-based text editor. You don't install a new program at all. And actually, if you're on Linux, it's often pre-installed in some way. It is designed around keyboard first editing. The idea is that once you are eased into it, you should be able to fly through your code base without ever touching the mouse or the trackpad. Instead of keyboard shortcuts like Control C, Control V, stuff you'd be used to, Vim has modes. So normal mode lets you navigate through text, but you can't type anything in normal mode. To type, you have to use insert mode. Insert mode is what actually lets you type stuff. You will feel right at home here if you're trying this out for the first time. Visual mode lets you kind of select and manipulate text. It's kind of the equivalent of maybe dragging your mouse over a selection of text. There's also a command mode where you can do many tasks such as quitting, opening a new file, saving that file. And there's actually many memes around the internet of Vim being difficult to quit. I mean, I guess it is a few extra steps compared to a normal IDE. Guys, I figured it out. You're free. You're welcome. But then what is NeoVim? A term you might have heard more frequently. Well, Vim is actually quite old. It actually dates back to the early 90s. So NeoVim is a modern fork of Vim that started in 2014. NeoVim came in and completely modernized the codebase, drastically improved plugin support, and made everything easier to extend and integrate. Most notably, it included built-in LSP support, which gives you your autocomplete and your definitions, and it uses Lua instead of Vim script, which is huge because now plugins and extensions aren't tied down by a proprietary scripting language. And Lua is actually a pretty simple language to get started on. It's actually what Roblox uses. NeoVim can actually mimic the feel of a full IDE once it's fully configured. I mean, look at some of these people's configs. Like, if I didn't tell you otherwise, you would think that that's probably just an IDE they're using. It also has very well-maintained extensions like Telescope for file searching, Tree Setter for syntax highlighting and other stuff, and Git integration, obviously. But what's the catch? I mean, like, this all sounds great. A modern code editor that has such amazing community support, and it increases your efficiency, tenfold. So what could possibly be the issue? Well, at least as I see it, the issue with Vim is the learning curve. The learning curve is absolutely brutal. Your productivity will go way down as you spend your time learning how everything works. And it's about building muscle memory, which takes a lot of time and patience and practice. Most people quit super early on. It's kind of similar to jumping in the deep end of a pool, not knowing how to swim. It is just not great for beginners who want a ready-to-go package. It kind of reminds me of the Linux mindset where you want as minimal bloat as possible for you to get your work done. But if you're interested in getting started with Vim, where do you start? Most devs start with Vim motions inside of their current editor. So VSCode actually has an extension that will mimic the Vim experience. It's a bit of a gateway drug in that it gives you kind of the power of Vim without you having to give up completely your VSCode ecosystem. You get Vim's editing speed, but you get your usual VSCode UI and extensions. It's also extremely easy to set up. Overall, it's a really solid option for learning Vim, but we can do better. If I'm going to try this out, I want the full experience. I uninstalled Cursor and VSCode, and I did some research on how to get started with NeoVim like anybody else would, going to Google and looking up NeoVim install. There's actually a few options. There's the default NeoVim installation, which is what I originally tried at the very start. It's very simple on macOS. It was just brew install NeoVim, provided you have homebrew installed already. But you can actually also get pre-configured packages such as LazyVim, AstroVim. I just went with LazyVim as it definitely seemed to be the most popular. In the official NeoVim help guide, it's actually one of the ones that's listed. It's quite simple to get started with LazyVim. You just copy 1 to 2 commands from their website and you're done. Once I was up and running, I had a few problems. I skimmed the get started guide. There was a few extra things I had to do to get it working right. I had to install a nerd font, basically used to render icons, because if you don't use a nerd font, every icon that shows up as this kind of question mark in a box. I also had to install the package called FD. I just used brew again, brew install FD. LazyVim needs that to search files. I also had to install a new terminal, as the default macOS terminal is not recommended for use with NeoVim. I installed Kitty at first, but then I opened the settings page for Kitty and saw that it was just a text file. So basically I switched to iTerm, which actually had a proper GUI settings page. And after some tinkering and some setup, I was able to get my terminal looking like this. That just looks sick. It is so minimal and very aesthetically pleasing with the transparency effect. I had to Google how to make LazyVim transparent because by default it isn't. So I can make my terminal transparent, but LazyVim still had like a gray background. First Reddit post I found when you look up how to make it transparent, that worked fine. So Vim kind of tries to use actual words to define what buttons do. What button do you think would put you in inspect mode? It's I. What button do you think puts you in visual mode? It's V. And by far my favorite copying in Vim is called yanking. So you use Y to yank text. Getting used to the basics isn't too bad. You just use H, J, K, L on your keyboard to move left, up, down, right, respectively. I think one of the reasons I was actually used to this is because there was an old Flash game I used to play as a kid on the web browser where you used HJKL to move. A few combinations I got really used to really fast was space plus E opens the file explorer on the left, similar to a regular IDE, and then space plus W lets you switch between the windows, file explorer, and your editor. It was very nice with my particular tech stack and particularly using the I term as my terminal. I could just hit Command 1 and I'd be in my NeoVim editor. Command 2 and I'd be in my terminal running my front end, and Command 3 would put me in my back end. So I could switch between them so seamlessly with just keyboard shortcuts. Instead of having a permanent terminal screen like I normally do on VSCode, the bottom of my terminal also always displays the system clock, current Vim mode, and the current Git branch, which is very nice because I always forget what branch I'm in. And it also shows you a little box of what current Vim actions you're doing. Using this for a while, you really start flying between files. Creating a new file, you just space E, then you press A, then you enter the file name, boom, done. While that might sound complex, it really isn't, because once you actually get used to doing it, you do it without even thinking about it. And you can press all those buttons in like 1 second. Seconds saved, which doesn't sound like much, but it just adds up over time. I've been using it for about a week now as my sole editor, and I would say that my productivity has reached probably about 60% of what it was if I would just stayed on VS Code. Some things I think are just really intuitive with a GUI or graphics interface. Interacting with Git is one of the things that's just much better in my opinion with a graphics user interface instead of just typing a command for everything you want to do. And as much support as there is in NeoVim, things like scanning a project or merge conflicts are just still, I think, a bit better in VS Code. A lot of that can be replicated in NeoVim, but it takes much more setup, much more learning, and more patience. I'm not magically faster, I didn't unlock some superpower. If I truly wanted to get the full advantages of NeoVim, I would have to, like a muscle that you're trying to strengthen, exercise it continuously. If you want something that, just works, NeoVim is definitely not for you. There are literally 30+ minute videos on YouTube of people that are just setting up their NeoVim configs. The reason why there's so much, opinionated prepackaged configs for NeoVim, like LazyVim, is because the base NeoVim gives you like nothing. To get to even a quarter of the functionality of VS Code with a base NeoVim config would take hours of setup. Also on Windows, I don't know if it was just me, but the setup process was a bit more difficult than on Mac or Linux. On Windows, I had a lot of trial and error getting the C compiler to work, which you need for this to work. There was a lot of different ways to get one of those for Windows, but the only one that actually seemed to work for me was I had to install Visual Studio. Not VS Code, the proper Visual Studio, and I had to select some packages that would give me a C compiler. I am definitely going to keep using it, as I hope I can replace Visual Studio Code with NeoVim. It's also quite fun to use, constantly improving yourself, and it's like you're constantly improving on a skill. Kind of get addicting. If you're even slightly interested, I would say give it a go with the VS Code extension first. A very simple, safe option. If you enjoyed, you should subscribe, because at 1,000 subscribers, I'm setting this to my profile picture. See ya.